Aaron had always been an observer, someone who preferred to stay in the background. His life was simple. He worked as a clerk in a small office and lived in a modest apartment on the edge of the city. But for 3 years, his life was consumed by the woman who lived in apartment 203, Emily. He first saw her one evening when she moved in. She was carrying boxes up the stairs, a slight smile on her face as she greeted the neighbors. Her beauty struck him instantly. But it wasn't just her looks. It was the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she laughed. To Aaron, it was like she was a perfect creation, and he couldn't help but watch from the shadows. At first, it was innocent. He would catch glimpses of her as she left for work in the mornings or returned late at night. Sometimes, if he timed it right, he would stand near the mailbox waiting to accidentally run into her. He'd make small talk, always polite, always brief. Emily, of course, had no idea. To her, he was just another neighbor, someone she nodded at but never really paid much attention to. But as the months passed, Aaron's obsession deepened. He began to learn everything about her without her knowledge. He discovered her work hours, her weekend routine, even the name of her favorite cafe. Emily had a routine, a life that seemed so perfectly set, and Aaron made sure he was always there, lurking just beyond her line of sight. One evening, as he watched her return from a run, something changed. For the first time, she looked directly at him as she passed by his door. "Hi, Aaron," she said, her voice light and friendly. He froze for a moment, stunned by the sound of her voice directed at him. It was the first time she had ever used his name. The conversation was brief, but to Aaron, it felt like a breakthrough. He couldn't stop smiling for hours afterward. But that brief interaction was all it took. His thoughts began to swirl. He needed more. He wanted more. He didn't just want to be a neighbor. He wanted to be part of her life, to be with her in ways that felt impossible. The idea of watching her, of being near her, was no longer enough. Aaron had to find a way to get closer, to make sure she couldn't live without him. He started planning. Aaron's obsession grew steadily, like a vine creeping up the side of a building. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Every time she smiled, every time she laughed, it felt like a crack in the world had opened just for him. She was so close, and yet she was so far away. He had to find a way to close the gap. It started small, moving things around in the hallway, standing in the right spot just outside her door. Sometimes, when she was out of the apartment, Aaron would sit in his own apartment and just listen. The walls were thin, and he could hear her footsteps, the hum of her voice on the phone, the sound of her opening and closing her windows. Each noise was like a breadcrumb, a sign that she was still there, still real and still in his world. Aaron had learned how to keep his distance, to be the perfect neighbor. He never came on too strong, never let his presence be too known. He made sure to always smile when he passed her in the hallway, to always be polite but never too familiar. She still didn't know him. She didn't realize how much of her life he had already memorized. One day as he was walking back from work, he saw Emily standing outside her apartment, talking on the phone. She looked frustrated, her arms crossed, her lips pressed together tightly. Aaron froze, watching her from around the corner of the hallway. He knew that look. It was the same look she had whenever she was arguing with someone. She hung up the phone, looking down at the ground. It was as if the world had just crashed down on her, and Aaron could see it clearly. For a split second, he felt a pang of sympathy. He didn't want her to hurt. He didn't want to see her sad. But that was when it hit him. He could fix it. He could be the one to make her happy. The idea settled deep into his mind, slowly growing roots. If only he could be the one to help her, to show her that there was someone who truly cared, someone who would never hurt her. It was the perfect plan. She needed him. The next day, when he saw her on her way to work, he decided it was time. Aaron made sure to stand in her path, just long enough for her to notice him. She stopped, her eyes widening as he smiled. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice warm and casual. "I heard you on the phone last night. You okay?" Emily looked at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she quickly recovered. "Oh, it's nothing, just work stuff." She smiled politely, but there was a coldness in her eyes that Aaron didn't. "Miss, I'm sorry to hear that," he said, taking a step closer. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. You don't have to go through things alone. Her smile faltered for a moment, but she nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that. He watched her walk away, feeling a surge of triumph. He had said the right thing, given her the opening. The seed was planted. All he had to do now was wait for the right moment. As the days passed, Aaron kept his distance but was always nearby. He saw her more and more. At the grocery store, at the cafe she liked, walking her dog. Each time he made sure to be there, to be just close enough that she would notice him. Sometimes she would nod or wave. Other times she didn't even acknowledge his presence. But Aaron didn't care. He knew that eventually she would come to him. She would need him. And when that moment came, he would be there to step in, to take the place of whatever man or problem was causing her pain. He was patient. He was always patient. Weeks went by, and Aaron's presence in Emily's life became a quiet fixture. She didn't know it, but he was always just around the corner. At the coffee shop she visited every Saturday, at the grocery store on Sundays when she picked up her fresh vegetables, in the building's courtyard when she walked her dog. At first she would give him polite smiles or nods of acknowledgement, but nothing more. Slowly, however, he began to sense a shift. She was starting to notice him more, to pay attention to his every move. Her smiles lingered a little longer. Her waves were a little more genuine. It was only a matter of time before she would open up. But Aaron didn't want to wait for chance encounters any longer. He wanted to be closer, to make sure she never felt alone again. So he put his plan into action. One rainy Tuesday evening, after Emily had returned from work, Aaron followed her into the building. She didn't seem to notice him. He watched her disappear into her apartment, the sound of her door clicking shut. Then, without hesitation, he walked to his own door, and instead of going inside, he simply stood there. He waited for her to make her next move. He knew she had a habit of leaving her apartment late at night to grab a coffee or take a walk in the rain. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, Emily's door opened again. She stepped out, pulling a coat over her shoulders as she headed down the hallway. Aaron could hear the sound of her boots tapping lightly against the floor. This was the moment. Silently, he slipped into her apartment behind her, closing the door with a soft click. He had practiced this move countless times, getting in without making a sound, slipping past the threshold as if he belonged there. It wasn't hard to find a place to hide. Emily's apartment was simple but cozy, with a comfortable couch and a small coffee table. He could see her reflection in the hallway mirror as she walked down to the kitchen, unaware that she was no longer alone. Aaron crouched behind the couch, watching her with a calm, almost clinical focus. His breath was shallow, his heart hammering in his chest. But he was careful, never making a sound, never moving too quickly. Emily moved around the apartment, making herself a cup of tea. She hummed a soft tune as she worked, completely unaware of the silent figure lurking in her home. It was thrilling, this closeness, to be so near her, to be in her space, to be the shadow in the corner of her life. She sat on the couch after a while, tea in hand, scrolling through her phone. Aaron couldn't tear his eyes away. He felt like he could watch her forever, but it was time to make his move. He waited until she stood up again, walking toward her bedroom. As she disappeared around the corner, he quietly stood up and moved closer. Her bedroom door was slightly ajar, and Aaron hesitated for only a moment before slipping inside. He could see her unpacking her work bag, laying out her clothes for the next day. The faint sound of her humming mixed with the sound of the rain outside. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. "Emily," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. She froze. Her head whipped toward the door. Her eyes were wide, her body tensing. "Who's there?" she called out, the panic starting to creep into her voice. Aaron stepped into the room, slowly, almost as if it were a dance. "It's me, Aaron," he said, his voice steady. "I wanted to be closer, to be someone you could count on." Emily's face was a mix of shock and confusion. She took a step back, her hand reaching for the phone on her nightstand. "What are you doing in here?" Her voice was shaky, but her eyes were starting to narrow, the realization settling in. "I told you," Aaron said softly. "I'm here for you. I'm the one who's always been here, watching over you." Her eyes darted to the door, and Aaron could sense she was thinking about escaping, running for help. But he was faster. With a single step, he was in front of her, blocking the exit. "Don't be scared," he whispered. "You've always known I was here. You just didn't see me. But I've been waiting, Emily. Waiting for you to realize that I'm the only one who can make you happy." Emily looked at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. No. You don't understand. You need to leave. You need to get out of here now." But Aaron wasn't listening. He reached out, his hand brushing against her arm, and she flinched, pulling away. His eyes darkened, but his voice remained calm. "Shh," he said softly, taking another step forward. "You'll understand soon enough. You don't have to be afraid of me. I'm here for you." Emily's eyes were wide with fear, but there was no escape. Aaron had blocked the door, and she wasn't sure how much time she had before she could get away. Her heart pounded in her chest as the room seemed to close in around her. She needed help. She needed to get out of there. But Aaron was relentless. In the silence that followed, she knew there was only one way to make him stop. Emily's heart raced as she backed into the corner of her room. The wall felt cold against her back, but it wasn't the chill of the room that made her shiver. It was Aaron's presence, the overwhelming weight of his stillness. His eyes were fixed on her, dark and intense, like a predator stalking its prey. She could feel the walls closing in, the suffocating sense that she was trapped, with no way out. Her fingers tightened around the phone in her hand, but she didn't dare to make a move. She couldn't afford to make him angry. "Aaron," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing? Why are you in here?" His lips curled into a slow, almost tender smile, but there was something terrifying about it, something that made her blood run cold. "I'm here for you, Emily. I've always been here." His voice was soft, almost soothing, but it had a dark undertone that sent waves of fear crashing over her. "You've never had to be alone. I've been watching over you, waiting for you to see that." Emily's stomach churned and she forced herself to look away from his piercing gaze. She had to think, to get out of this. She could hear the faint sound of rain pattering against the window, the only noise in the room besides her frantic breathing. Her thoughts were racing, but they all led to the same conclusion. She needed to escape. She needed to get help. "Aaron," she said, her voice shaking now, "I don't want any part of this. You need to leave my apartment. You don't belong here." The words didn't seem to affect him. He didn't flinch, didn't take a step back. Instead, he just took another slow step forward. "But I do belong here, Emily. I belong in your life. We were meant to be together. I know you felt it too. All those times I smiled at you. All those times I was there. You saw me, didn't you? You felt something." Her mind screamed at her to run, to do something, anything, but the fear had her frozen in place. She watched his every movement, the way he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. This was no longer the quiet neighbor who'd occasionally waved at her in the hall. This man, this version of Aaron, was someone entirely different, a stranger whose presence felt more like a threat than a comfort. "I don't," she trailed off, trying to find the words that might make him understand. But what could she say? How could she explain that she was terrified of him, that she wanted nothing to do with him, that she didn't even know him? But he wasn't listening. "Aaron, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she took a step back, her fingers still clutching the phone. Her heart pounded harder, the pulse in her throat threatening to burst through her skin. "You're not well. You need help." He stopped in his tracks, his smile faltering for a moment, and Emily thought, just for a split second, that she might have reached him. Maybe she had said the right thing. But then his expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. The tenderness faded from his face, replaced by something colder, more menacing. "I am well," he said, the words sharp like a knife. "You just don't understand yet, but you will. You'll see." Emily's mind raced. She couldn't think straight. The phone in her hand was her only lifeline, and she needed to use it. But she had to wait for the right moment. She had to wait until he wasn't looking. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to move, to do something, anything to stop him from getting closer. She glanced at the door, knowing it was blocked. There was no escape through there. But the window, She could climb out the window. She had to. Aaron took another step toward her, and she was running out of time. "I'm not like the others, Emily," he said, his voice suddenly low, almost intimate. "I'm not like those people who come and go in your life. I'm not like your exes or the guys you date. I'm the one who will always be here. You won't have to go through this alone anymore." A shiver of panic ran down her spine. "Please, Aaron, you're scaring me," she said, her voice cracking as she tried to edge toward the window. But he was already too close. His hand reached out to grab her wrist, pulling her back toward him with surprising strength. Her heart thudded violently in her chest, the sound deafening in her ears. "No," she gasped, yanking her arm free. She stumbled backward, the fear of being cornered making her dizzy. "Let go of me!" But Aaron's expression had changed. His eyes were no longer filled with that almost affectionate intensity. Now they were cold, empty. The smile on his lips twisted into something darker. "You're not going anywhere, Emily," he said, his voice harsh and low. "I won't let you leave." In that moment, everything about the man in front of her seemed to shift. The comforting, almost patient Aaron she had once known was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. She was no longer dealing with a man who wanted to help her. Now she was facing a man who believed he had a claim on her, who believed she couldn't exist without him. Emily's mind was racing, her body on autopilot. She was terrified, her pulse pounding in her ears. There was no time to hesitate anymore. She had to act. Before she could think twice, she grabbed the nearest object, a lamp from the bedside table, and swung it as hard as she could, smashing it against Aaron's head. For a moment, the world went quiet. Time seemed to slow down. He staggered back, his hand instinctively going to his head. Emily's breath was ragged as she seized the opportunity. She sprinted toward the door, her body moving on a sheer adrenaline. But Aaron wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The knife felt foreign in Emily's hands, its weight unsteady, but she clutched it like a lifeline. Her mind raced, adrenaline and fear taking control of her body. She had no plan, just one goal: survive. Aaron didn't flinch when she raised the blade. Instead, his lips twisted into a sick smile as though he were amused by her fear. By the way she trembled, weapon in hand. But there was a coldness in his eyes, a look of certainty, as if he had already won. "You don't have to do this, Emily," he said softly, taking a slow step toward her. "I'm just trying to help you. I'm the only one who truly understands you." She held her ground, her breath coming in quick, panicked bursts. "No!" she hissed, her voice tight with fear and defiance. "You're crazy." Aaron didn't seem to hear her words. His eyes were still locked on hers, as if he could see through the knife, through her fear, to some deeper truth he thought existed between them. He took another step closer. She instinctively took a step back, but the wall stopped her. She was cornered, and for the first time, the gravity of the situation truly sank in. She was in his domain now. The apartment she had once thought was her safe haven, the place where she had built her life, had become a prison. She could feel the walls closing in, suffocating her. "I'm the only one who's ever cared," Aaron whispered, his voice low and insistent. "You'll see that. You'll understand once I'm with you. We'll be happy, I promise." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're sick," she whispered through a strangled sob. "I don't want this. I never asked for it." But Aaron didn't seem to hear her. His face grew more intense, the darkness in his eyes deepening. His lips parted, and the smile returned, this time cold and unfeeling. "You're just scared, but you'll see. You'll realize I'm all you need." With one quick movement, he lunged toward her. "No!" Instinctively, Emily slashed the knife in front of her, the blade cutting the air with a sharp, high-pitched sound. Aaron's eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, before his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. The force of his grip was like steel, and she gasped in pain. He twisted her arm, the knife slipping from her fingers, and in one fluid motion, he sent it clattering to the floor. For a moment, she was too stunned to react. The knife, her only defense, was gone, and now Aaron was close, too close, his body pressing against hers. She could feel the heat of his breath on her neck, hear the uneven rhythm of his heartbeat. "You don't need that," he whispered, his voice eerily calm. "I'm not going to hurt you, Emily. I'll never hurt you. But his words didn't match the intensity in his touch. The way his hands gripped her shoulders, the force in his movements. He wasn't holding her like someone who cared. He was controlling her, making her feel as if there were no escape. Fear clawed at her chest as she realized how easily he had disarmed her, how quickly he had gotten the upper hand. Her legs felt weak, her mind clouded with terror. She tried to push him away, but he was too strong, too relentless. She could feel her breathing quickening, her body trembling as she struggled against him. His fingers dug into her skin, bruising her arms, and for the first time Emily felt the terrifying weight of her situation. She was trapped. But then something inside her snapped. A wave of pure, raw desperation surged through her, overriding everything else. With all her strength, Emily slammed her knee into his groin. Aaron's grip loosened just enough for her to break free. She didn't hesitate. She turned and ran, her legs nearly buckling beneath her as she bolted across the apartment. She heard him curse behind her, but she didn't dare look back. The front door was only a few feet away, but she had no idea if she could make it. Her body was already shaking from fear and exhaustion, but she pushed herself harder. The door was just within reach when she felt him grab her again. His hands were around her waist now, pulling her back with brutal force. He jerked her off her feet, spinning her around until she was facing him once again. His face was twisted with fury, the madness in his eyes making her blood run cold. "No!" she screamed, kicking out with her foot, but his grip only tightened, and he slammed her against the wall, knocking the air from her lungs. "You can't run from me, Emily," he growled, his voice thick with anger and frustration. "I won't let you. You're mine. You'll always be mine." Tears blurred her vision as she gasped for breath. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this up. Her body ached, her head was spinning, and she couldn't find the strength to push him off again. The desperation in his voice, the finality in his words, it was like a switch had flipped inside him. There was no more reasoning with him. She wasn't dealing with a man who was confused. She wasn't dealing with a man who wanted her to be happy. Aaron had lost himself completely, and she was standing at the edge of something far darker than she had ever imagined. Before she could respond, before she could even think, he lifted her off the ground again, his hands rough as they tightened around her arms. "I said," he whispered, his voice deadly calm, "you're not leaving." Suddenly she realized the only way out was to make him believe she was finally giving in. Aaron's grip on her arms was so tight that her skin burned where his fingers pressed into her. The cold, calculating look in his eyes sent another jolt of fear through her chest. He wasn't just trying to control her. He had already decided that he owned her, and nothing she could say would make him let go. In that moment, Emily knew that if she didn't do something drastic, she wouldn't make it out of this alive. Her mind was racing, but it felt like the room was spinning. Too much terror, too many thoughts, too many things that had happened too quickly. She was out of options. She had to play the long game now. She had to make him believe she was no longer fighting back. The thought terrified her, but she suppressed it. Just survive, and you'll find a way out. Taking a deep breath, Emily let her body go limp in Aaron's hold, as though she had given up. She stopped struggling, stopped fighting him, and instead she closed her eyes briefly, hoping he would mistake her exhaustion for surrender. At first, Aaron didn't notice. He was still too caught up in the fantasy of what he thought was happening. He wanted to believe that she would come around, that she would recognize him as her savior and not her captor. His grip softened, but only slightly. His breath, still unsteady, tickled her ear as he leaned closer, his lips brushing against the side of her face. "See, Emily," he whispered, his voice soft, almost loving. "I told you. You don't have to fight me. We can be happy. You'll see. This is what's best for you." Emily's body remained limp in his arms, but her mind was working frantically. She needed to create the illusion that she was no longer resisting him. She needed him to believe that she had given in completely. She focused on controlling her breathing, making it slow and steady, even as the dread built in her chest. She could feel the weight of his presence, feel the heat of his breath on her neck. The longer she remained still, the more he seemed to relax. The grip around her arms loosened, just a fraction. The moments stretched on. Time slowed. Aaron took a step back, his hands trailing down her arms as though he were trying to reassure himself that she was finally his. She could feel his gaze on her, and she didn't dare move. She had to stay in character, had to play the part of the broken woman who had nowhere to go. I knew you'd understand eventually, Aaron said softly, his voice almost affectionate now. You're mine, Emily. You always were. Emily's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. The mask she was wearing, pretending to be the docile woman he wanted her to be, was suffocating her. But she had no choice. She had to make him believe he had won. Make him think you're weak. Let him lower his guard. The longer she stood there pretending to have surrendered, the more confident Aaron seemed to get. He took another step back, as if giving her space, but his eyes never left her. I'll take care of you, Emily. You won't have to worry about anything anymore. I'll protect you. I'll keep you safe. The words were poison. Every time he spoke them, it was like a cold hand gripped her heart, pulling her further into his twisted world. But she couldn't show him that. She couldn't give away how terrified she was. Instead, she nodded slowly, her face blank, her eyes dull. I understand, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Aaron's eyes softened, as though her submission had finally calmed the storm inside him. He let out a breath, one that sounded almost relieved. I knew you would, he murmured, stepping closer again, as though he wanted to touch her. His fingers brushed against her cheek in a tender gesture that made her stomach turn. But she didn't flinch. She kept her body still, kept her expression vacant. For a moment she could hear only the thrum of her pulse in her ears. The sound of the rain tapping against the windows was almost soothing in comparison to the nightmare she was trapped in, but she couldn't afford to let down her guard, not yet. Aaron's movements became slow, deliberate, as if he was savoring the moment of control he had over her. He pulled her toward the couch, guiding her down so that she was seated beside him. His hand rested gently on her knee, and he leaned in close, his voice almost a whisper now. You're safe now, he said, a strange tenderness in his tone. You don't have to be afraid of me, Emily. I'll never let anyone hurt you again. Her insides were screaming, but she kept her face neutral. Focus. Focus on surviving. Focus on the next move. Suddenly, she felt his hand move higher, brushing against her thigh. The touch felt like fire, every inch of her skin crawling in revulsion, but she couldn't pull away. Not yet. She couldn't risk it. Instead, she swallowed hard, suppressing the bile that rose in her throat, and let her body go limp again. She leaned into him just slightly, just enough to give the illusion that she was giving in, that she was no longer trying to escape. His smile widened, and he kissed her forehead softly. We'll be so happy together, I promise. Just trust me. And that was when Emily knew. She had to make him believe she was broken, that she was powerless, that there was no escape. Because in that moment, while he was lost in his delusion of her submission, she could see one thing clearly. Her only hope of surviving this was outsmarting him, and she would do whatever it took. The minutes stretched into hours, each one more suffocating than the last. Aaron was beside her on the couch, still holding her close, his fingers lightly tracing over her skin. His breathing had slowed, and Emily could feel the warmth of his body against hers, the oppressive weight of his presence settling in. He had no idea how close he was to the edge. She was no longer pretending to be someone she wasn't. No, Emily had made her peace with the fact that, for now, the only way out was through him. The only way to survive was to outlast him, outwit him. But how? Her mind was spinning, searching for anything that might give her an advantage. The apartment had become a twisted version of a cage, a place where Aaron was the predator and she the prey. Yet somewhere deep inside, Emily could feel a flicker of hope, because she wasn't going to let him win. She couldn't. He leaned closer, his breath hot on her neck, his lips brushing against her skin as he whispered, You know, Emily, I've waited so long for this, for you to finally see it, to finally understand that we belong together. His voice was filled with satisfaction, like he'd already won. The calm in his tone was almost as chilling as the tension in the room. Her heart was pounding again, and she could feel a drop of sweat form on her brow. She had to act soon. The longer she stayed here, the more Aaron would feel like he controlled her. and the more he would believe he had her where he wanted her. I understand, she said quietly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. I understand now, Aaron. You're right. He stiffened, his eyes sharpening, studying her closely. His face, once soft with tenderness, now became guarded. What do you mean? She shifted, turning slightly to face him. The moment was delicate, fragile. The slightest mistake could tip the scales in his favor, but she had come too far to back down now. I was scared at first, she continued, her voice soft, as though she were confessing some deep, buried truth. But I think I was just afraid of how perfect this is, how perfect we are. The words were a trap. Every one of them was designed to lull him into a false sense of security, to convince him that she was finally submitting, that she had finally accepted him. She saw the spark of pleasure in his eyes, the way his body seemed to relax. His shoulders dropped, his hands no longer trembling with excitement. He smiled. You're finally starting to understand, he murmured, the softness returning to his voice. He leaned in to kiss her, but this time Emily pulled back slightly, just enough to keep him from closing the distance. I understand that you're right about one thing, she said, her voice a little firmer now. You've been waiting for this. But what you didn't count on is that I've been waiting for something else. Aaron blinked, a frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. What do you mean? I've been waiting for the right moment, she said, a quiet, cold confidence creeping into her voice. And you've just handed it to me. Before he could react, before he could process what she had said, Emily reached behind her hand grasping the lamp she had knocked over earlier. Her fingers tightened around the base, the jagged edges of the broken glass cutting into her palm. It wasn't much, just a small shard of glass, but it was enough to make him hesitate. Aaron's eyes widened, a flash of confusion crossing his face as he looked at the lamp in her hand. He didn't understand what was happening. Not yet. Emily, he said, his voice cautious, the tenderness from before now tinged with uncertainty. What are you doing? Put it down. You don't need that. I need it more than you know, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. She had no time for fear now. No more pretending. In a sudden move, she swung the lamp at him with all the force she could muster. The broken glass grazed his cheek, and Aaron recoiled with a sharp gasp. But it wasn't the glass that had hit him. It was the reality of what was happening. She was no longer the helpless, terrified woman he thought she was. She was fighting back. You're not in control, Emily spat, her chest heaving, and I will make sure you never hurt anyone again. Aaron staggered back, his hand flying to his cheek where blood began to pool from the shallow cut. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, his eyes wide with disbelief, his face twisted in pain. But there was no sympathy in her heart, no hesitation, not anymore. You think I'm weak? Emily hissed, her grip tightening on the lamp. You think I'll just let you break me? You're the one who's broken? He growled, the fury flashing in his eyes. His body tensed, ready to lunge at her. But he was disoriented now, unsure of how to regain control. For a moment, Emily saw a flicker of the man he used to be. A man who was still trying to rationalize everything, to explain away his madness. But it didn't matter anymore. In the next instant, Emily struck again. This time, she swung the lamp with all her remaining strength, aiming for his head. The impact was sickening. Aaron's body jerked back as the lamp connected, and he crumpled to the ground, his head hitting the floor with a thud. Silence filled the room. The air was thick with tension as Emily stood there, her heart racing, her breath shallow and uneven. She didn't move for a moment,